Good evening. For my final topic, I chose human trafficking. I chose this topic because it has become an increasingly hot topic in global society. It is a sad reality when thousands of women, children, and even men are held against their will and forced to work under the harshest of circumstances while making absolutely nothing. Their lives and identity are stripped from them. Human trafficking is the movement of people illegally, who are typically placed into forced labor and commercial sexual exploitation. According to the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, human trafficking affects every country of the world. As country of origin, transit, or destination, victims from at least 127 countries have been found to be exploited in 137 states. This is clearly a problem of global scale and need of fresh, robust, and interdisciplinary solutions such as law, social work, and economics. This is an industry that makes $32 billion a year with 2.4 million employees that does not have to pay taxes or that is held accountable by global governments. Victims are promised bright futures that will make a difference for their families. They are coerced and even sometimes kidnapped. They are transported to foreign lands and made dependent on their captors. Human trafficking greatly benefits from globalization. Nagal notes that human trafficking benefits from one of the crucial engines of globalization, the supply and demand of transportable commodities, as well as from the transfer of capital, the opening of borders, and trade deregulation. In Europe, sexual exploitation is one of the most lucrative illicit businesses. Criminals make around $2.5 billion per year through sexual exploitation and forced labor. Our homeland, the United States, is in the top 10 destinations for human trafficking. According to Hepburn and Simon, there have been reports of trafficking in over 90 American cities. Victims are trafficked here from Latin America, the Caribbean, Asia, Africa, and Europe, and for the purposes of forced labor and sexual exploitation. As individuals in society, it is our primary role to be well educated on the matter of human trafficking in order to help end it. The U.S. Department of State has a list of 20 ways we can help to fight human trafficking, including knowing the red flags that may indicate human trafficking and how to ask follow-up questions, taking human trafficking awareness training, calling the National Human Trafficking Resource Center to report tips, volunteering to do victim outreach at a local anti-trafficking organization, and much more. According to Nagal, it is the responsibility of origin nations to provide adequate security, especially human security, for its citizens, and to create an environment conducive to the growth of economic opportunities. It is the nation's role to offer educational instruction of various kinds and levels, and a place where citizens can pursue personal goals and prosper. Governments need to create policy in order to protect the vulnerable and prosecute the criminal. Nations should also take into consideration the experience and knowledge that social workers possess as part of their role in eliminating trafficking of people. Jones, Engstrom, Hillard, and Diaz bring to light that social workers need to recognize that some of the thousands of trafficked people in the United States will end up as their clients in emergency rooms, domestic violence shelters, mental health facilities, and child welfare systems. To intervene effectively, social workers must become aware of the realities of trafficking. Social workers have a unique skill set that, combined with policy, could really benefit the victims of human trafficking by providing materials on how to counsel a trafficked victim and how states and even nations should respond to victims, and they could also help to set policy. In the case of the U.S., Hepburn and Simon note that while laws that prohibit human trafficking are vital, what is most important is the implementation and enforcement of those laws. In 2000, the first federal law focused on eliminating human trafficking was the TVPA. The act requires the U.S. State Department to create an annual Trafficking of Persons report. The report rates each country by way of tiers and its efforts and success rates of combating human trafficking. Countries rated as Tier 3 face possible U.S. sanctions. The global role is for every nation to use the good powers of globalization to exchange information and work together to bring human traffickers to justice and to protect victims by offering rehabilitation programs and placing victims back in their homes in which they were taken from. Creating effective policy for the issue of human trafficking is a tricky thing. In many countries with corrupt governments, policy does not hold those who facilitate human trafficking to justice. Due to the covertness of human trafficking, it is also difficult to enforce law that criminalizes traffickers. Because profits are recognized by policymakers and business people as the main goal of globalization, nations struggling to position themselves in regional and global markets are failing to impose severe penalties on unscrupulous employers hiring migrants illegally, and failing to prosecute predatory consumers of sex, or fine and imprison visa contractors or connection men, as traffickers are often known, according to Nagal. Another interesting problem when it comes to creating policy is that many migrants who come to the United States from Latin America actually hold visas that are procured by their traffickers. According to Hepburn and Simon, at least 95% of the aforementioned alleged victims trafficked to the Gulf Coast were visa holders. Of those 1,318 persons, 996 were H-2B visa holders, 22 were H-2A visa holders, and 300 were H-1B visa holders. Most of these workers were recruited by U.S. companies or their agents. This poses an interesting challenge. Since these victims are coming to America legally, it eliminates a red flag for law enforcement. This should be taken into consideration as lawmakers create policy to both protect victims and prosecute traffickers who use visas to hide their underground operations. Besides the challenges of policy and law, there are also challenges for the global community. One such challenge is the supply and demand of forced labor and sexual exploitation. Hepburn, Simon, and Nagal, as well as Jones et al., all note that there is this global push and pull, or simply supply and demand, for human trafficking. Demand stems from the following: high demand for cheap or uncompensated labor, weak or no law against various forms of forced servitude, demand by men looking for commercial sex and bondage arrangements, indifference to social conditions and morality, lack of public awareness, corruption, weak law enforcement, inconsistent application of public policy, and entrenched organized crime networks. While supply comes from high unemployment and poverty, discriminatory labor markets, lack of opportunity to improve one's quality of life, gender or ethnic discrimination, internal conflict and persecution, etc. Thus, there is a very large challenge to decrease both supply and demand. It is obviously clear that if there is no demand, then there is no supply. The challenge in creating lessened to no demand is this: due to the criminal, secretive nature of human trafficking, victims are often hidden in brothels, homes, and businesses. Moreover, law enforcement, social workers, healthcare professionals, and other authorities rarely encounter victims of human trafficking, both because they are frequently unaware of how to identify potential victims and because victims are intentionally kept out of sight, according to Jones et al. Even if victims do come into contact with law enforcement or social services, they are usually reluctant to ask for help, partly as a result of psychological coercion, but also because of they fear retribution from their traffickers, according to the U.S. the U.S. Department of Justice. There is rarely a spotlight on human trafficking from global news media unless something tragic has already happened. Or there is a large sporting event in town, and they briefly mention that these events are frequently used to capture people into human trafficking, and also for sexual exploitation. If news media took a different approach, maybe they could help the cause of eliminating human trafficking by drawing attention to the inhumanity and criminal act of exploiting human beings as a commodity, and by working with state and national government to create awareness for the average person on how to treat victims if you come into contact with one, whom to call, and how to best help. Social networking can also play a role in eliminating the demand for human trafficking. There are organizations such as the Polaris Project and the End It movement that frequently use social media to make the average person aware of the effects of human trafficking in ways we can, as a society, help to end it. In our day and age, social media is vital in every human rights issue. Oftentimes, Facebook is where we go for our world news, based on what our friends are interested in. If many of our friends in a network frequently post about human trafficking, then the more people will see it. Technology can be used to advocate for victims and increase awareness. Since just about everyone in the world has access to the internet, it is a very usable platform to spread information throughout the world. There are several negative aspects to technology. The internet is ridden with porn and other sexual content that both men and women indulge in. This hurts the cause of ending human trafficking because it draws attention to the lust that many men wish to indulge in, and some do so through prostitutes, some of whom may be victims of human trafficking. Also, companies that utilize sweatshops can still advertise their merchandise throughout the internet, and someone may buy items on a website that supports the trafficking of people while being completely unaware of it. Technology is also used to communicate with others inside the human trafficking network, to conduct deals, sell humans, and transport them. Some positives of technology when it comes to human trafficking is that technology can be used to advocate for those who are trapped in the horrible cycle of human trafficking. Technology is used to track down the, quote, bad guys and to rescue victims. If a victim happened to get out of captivity, they might be able to use technology to contact the authorities or a hotline for help. It would be ideal if the positives of technology outweighed the negatives, but unfortunately, I do not believe that that is the case. We live in a world full of evil people, and when an industry is lucrative, whether good or evil, people use whatever means they have available to capitalize. Overall, human trafficking is a tricky situation across the board. It has a huge economic impact that is hard to quench. A globalized world that allows for greater supply and demand, and people like social workers who want to help victims, yet many victims will not make any contact with facilities that could get them out of their situations. It is clear that there is not one solution to the problem, but that there are multiple solutions that work together from the lenses of economics, law, and social work that combined together and enforced will help extinguish human trafficking from the face of the world. Thank you.